Hello there, cultists. We trust you well out there in the real world. If the opening music for this one didn't give it away, today our podcast journey for the next hour and change will be beginning where everything ends as we take a look at Disney's dark 1979 classic, The Black Hole. Now, as is customary, we'll be dealing in spoilers during the discussion, and while I think the moratorium on spoilers for this one ended a little while ago, if you're not familiar with the movie and don't want it ruined, then I urge you, do yourself a favour, go and check it out, and then come right back here to us. Now, before I go any further, I'd like to give a big thank you to Kenny Denton for allowing us the use of his Nostromo version of the titular Black Hole track. I really do appreciate this, Kenny. Certainly brought back some memories for me, and I hope for the audience now too. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And so on with today's show. And yes, we'll be going in, through, and beyond on today's movie. But as usual, I won't be the sole human left on board commanding this ship. I'll be joined by our esteemed panel of not quite faceless humanoid guests. So let's meet them. First up, if I'm the demented madman running this show, then that makes her my Maximilian. She's big, she's red. It's Sandy. It's Sandy Million. How are you doing today?
Great.
You're becoming quite the regular guest host on the cult episodes as of late. How are you finding it?
Very fun. You'd think I'd have an opening quote, but if I'm your Maximilian, he actually said nothing throughout the whole thing, so I had nothing.
Yeah, just a bit rebellious silently. So are you ready to go blade spinning for this one?
Yes, blade spinning.
Great stuff. Now, also joining us today is someone you last heard on our inaugural Buckaroo Banzai episode, where he was extolling the virtues of this one behind the scenes. It's Nige. Welcome, fella.
Hey, buddy. How you doing?
I'm all right. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm steady away. Thank you. Looking forward to this.
Nice. It's been a long time. How does it feel to be back?
Oh, I'm genuinely looking forward to it. Can't wait, to be honest. Bit of a deep dive into this film.
Great stuff. Because it's been such a while, do you want to give those listening in a little refresher on, what you're about? Anything about you yourself?
Oh, I don't really know what there's to say, to be honest. A bit of a geek, a bit of a nerd. Love my films far too much. Love my film scores equally. And I love talking about it and discussing it with people just as much. So, yeah, steady away 53-year-old that just enjoys his films too much.
Well, you're among like-minded people here, mate.
Yeah, I don't think there's such thing as too much.
Yeah. And finally, we've got yet another first-timer making his appearance today on the Cult Classics podcast. We put out a call, and like the hero he is, he answered. It's Gavin. Welcome, man.
Yes, thank you, man. Yes, fresh meat for the grinder. No pun intended, yes. I hope.
Oh, don't worry, there'll be no blood. How are you doing today?
Oh, we're doing well, thank you, man. Yeah, it's nice warm day. Nice to be here. Nice to be able to offer a little bit of conversation in the direction of this film. Another firm classic, and yes, another committed aficionado of films. So happy to be here.
Fantastic. With it being your first time here, do you want to tell everyone out there a little bit about yourself as well?
Oh, well, there's not much to talk about with me either. A bit of a committed enthusiast for creativity. I tend to try and lean towards graphic design or 3D modeling, anything like that. These are the kind of things that tend to pass me time. A little bit of creative writing as well. I'm hoping to get a screenplay written at some point. But yeah, that's another dark alley altogether. Other than that, yeah, I love my films, and I've done for a long time, and I've loved this one, ever since the beginning. So that marks me as reasonably old as well.
Well, seeing as it's your first appearance, I'm going to ask you what we ask everyone here on Cult Classics sooner or later.
Okay.
It's just so the listeners and us here can get more of a handle on you. If I had to ask you your favorite all-time cult movie, what's your personal number one?
Ooh, favorite all-time cult movie. Well, I'll tell you what. I've got to be honest. It's going to be this one. I think I genuinely do keep coming back to this particular movie, which is what kind of got me enthused about the idea of taking part in the review today.
Sandy's now probably thinking, "Oh shit." I can't say certain things.
Yeah, I mean, my earliest films that I can remember seeing that could be anything like a cult classic would be going back to the old Doug McClure with Warlords of Atlantis. I remember seeing that multiple times at one of the cinemas in Sheffield, and that was where my cinema viewing started. But the main feature before this one would have been Superman in the end of 1978, and then there was a bit of a gap in cinema, and I didn't do anything until this little beauty arrived on national release in March 1980, I believe it was. And I think it was at the back end of that when I saw it, so it must have been literally just coming up to the last sort of week of showing. And I pestered my dad to take me to go and see it for reasons which I've completely lost. But God, I'm glad he did. I think.
Well, back when we first started the Cult Classics, we were very much finding our feet. So it wasn't a question we asked back then. But now he's returned. This seems like the perfect time. So coming over to you with the same question, Nige. Favorite all-time personal cult classic?
I think for me, I think it's probably Carpenter's The Thing. It's the one that every time I watch it, I'm kind of blown away. I'm gripped. I've seen it so many times, and yet I can still watch it, listen to it, and I'm just in there 100% every time I watch it. I don't know if it's a cult classic now because it just seems to be as popular as ever. But it's one that just is such a great repeat viewing time for me. I still love anything. Like Gavin just said, Warlords of Atlantis, Land That Time Forgot, anything like that. I'm all over those sort of films. I absolutely love them. I've been jumping into a few different films there's so many great films that Arrow were releasing of late that just make great watching. So I'm still kind of picking up and learning new cult titles that I haven't seen. I actually saw a film called Vanishing Point the other week for the first time, which is a real different sort of film, more like a road movie. If any of you have seen that. But that, I absolutely loved it. Very different to what I normally watch, but that really worked for me.
I'll have to check that one out. Who's in it?
Oh, God. Do you know what? I've no idea right now. It's literally a guy delivering a car.
Oh.
And it's almost like, if you remember watching sort of like the new Mad Max movie, where it's basically they go there and they come back. Well, this is kind of the same, where this guy is delivering this car across America, and for some reason, various people then try and stop him. And it's the most strange film, but it looks great at times. And it's just really engrossing. I found it a real ethereal experience, just sat there, just taking it in. And while not a great deal happens, I just couldn't stop watching it.
Cool. I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah, it's worth a look.
Nice.
Sorry, I am just looking at it. Cleveland Little, was it?
Yes, that rings a bell.
Who, of course, if you know Blazing Saddles, I believe that was the sheriff of Rock Ridge, wasn't it?
Oh, right.
DJ. In this one, he plays a blind DJ.
Wow.
And he's great. It's not a performance you expect from it. It's really, really good. It's quite brutal at times, the film. It's a little bit harsh, but it's a very different sort of film. There's nothing sci-fi horror about it.
No.
But I just couldn't stop watching it. It's
nice.
I would recommend checking it out anyway.
Nice one.
Nice one there.
Right. So, we'll get back to the movie at hand, which, of course, today is The Black Hole. It originally began life in February 1974 as an Irwin Allen-style disaster movie in space called Space Station 1 from writers Bob Barbash and Richard Landau. The Black Hole then went through years of development and numerous iterations with a variety of different creatives. However, as the disaster movie trend waned, the script took a different direction, with the final product described as being more akin to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea in Space. Now, with a production budget of $26 million, including marketing, it was, at the time, the most expensive picture ever produced by Disney. It was also the first Disney production to receive a PG rating and set a tone that many later productions would follow, eventually leading to the creation of Touchstone Pictures in order to showcase movies too adult-oriented for the Disney Buena Vista label. Though nowadays the title is obviously Disney's The Black Hole. The Black Hole was also one of the last mainstream Hollywood films to feature an overture at the beginning of the movie. It was released officially on December 18, 1979 in the UK and on December 21st, 1979 in the United States. It received mixed reviews from film critics, but despite this, had a record opening weekend for Disney and eventually grossed $35 million in US territory alone. It was also nominated for 2 Academy Awards for Best Cinematography and Best Visual Effects. Until The Lone Ranger came along, many considered this film to be Disney's biggest flop and a symbol of everything wrong with Ron Miller's leadership of the company at the time, complete with countless jokes about the company's money being tossed into the eponymous black hole. It did earn a profit, albeit slight for the company, however, and while not very many people regard the film as one of Disney's finer moments, it is considered a science fiction classic, often cited along Blade Runner and Disney's later Tron as examples of films that failed upon first release, only to be critically reappraised and become a cult favorite. And The Black Hole is currently available to stream on Disney Plus, as well as being available on physical media on DVD, as well as Blu-ray, but only if you're part of the Disney exclusive movie club or get it from a scalper on eBay. So, don't get me started on that crap. So, yeah, I've got to ask you all. I do remember going to see this one with my parents, and though I can't remember the details, I do remember loving it, but being scared senseless by the end. I was very young at that point, so my child mind was blown by the last few minutes, but I do remember telling myself repeatedly that the planet they were making their way towards at the end was Earth, if only so I could sleep at night. I remember us hiring it on video not long after it came out and then recording it from the TV when it was on, and it was another one of those that was on constant rotation in our house. I loved it. So how about you guys? And I'll come to you first, Sandy.
I never saw this when I was younger, surprisingly. Somehow missed it. The first I remember is Superman and Return of the Jedi. Those are like the first 2 kind of sci-fi movies I saw. And then, of course, whatever came to TV and whatever we rented somehow never came across this until maybe about a year ago. I saw it on Disney whenever it was, I think it was when it was newly added or something. It came up and I checked it out. And I thought it was pretty cool. I thought it was pretty forward for the time as far as, the idea of a black hole. But that's really my first interaction with this movie.
Cool. And you, Gavin, you mentioned you went to the cinema to see this one.
Yes. The earliest memory I can pull of this was back in the day. We used to have a thing that used to get put on BBC. Was it BBC? I think it was the BBC. They used to have Disney Time. Whenever we got round to either Easter or Christmas, any of these sort of official holidays, kept getting this show coming on, and it would come on for half an hour. It'd be like a little bit of a filler, a little bit the way that they did with the Looney Tunes cartoons. And I can remember the Christmas edition in '79. It was Paul Daniels, magician Paul Daniels, that was hosting the show, and it was just on there. Yes, the one. Yeah, it was just on in the background, and it just started. Obviously, it was their opportunity to get everybody into the cinema, so they were talking about it at the end of that. And they showed the eponymous clip with the meteor shower, and that sort of caught my attention. It was like, oh, what's this? And that got me attention, and I loved it, and I thought that looked good. And then, as kids' minds do, they just sort of wander off, and that was it. And I never thought anything more about it. And then I was looking over my dad's shoulder when he was looking at the newspaper, and they got a poster, the theatrical poster printed in the newspaper, and I was looking at it and just thinking, I wonder if I could talk my dad into taking me to go to the cinema. I just fancied going to the cinema. That was all it was. And I said, "Oh, Dad, I wouldn't mind going to see that today. Would you be all right with that?" And he was like, well, yeah, if you want to go to the cinema. So we went. It was showing at the Gaumont, but it was good. It was amazing. We went to see it. I was looking at the poster when we were stood outside, thinking, "Oh, what am I getting myself into here?" But I remembered the stuff from Christmas and thought, "Oh, okay, well, we'll have a look at this. We'll see how it goes." And to this day, I really wish I'd taken the time to pick up the lobby posters and bits and things that they always used to have in the cinema. I could have had an absolute plethora of that stuff all piled up in the corner of my bedroom if only I'd thought about it at the time. But yeah, we went to see it, and it was absolutely phenomenal. I was absolutely drawn in by the opening sequence. I'd never experienced an overture before, so that was interesting to have that experience of, with it being that and Star Trek being the last ones, I think, at the time that had anything like that. Yeah, and again, as with yourself, man, it was a case of being dragged through this whole thing where it became a sort of a wide-eyed adventure that then became a bit of a mystery, and then I started getting my first ever taste of dark sort of Gothic horror. And yeah, was absolutely petrified and feeling quite ill by the end of it.
Nice.
Yeah,
it's stuck with you ever since.
Yeah, just the effect that it had on me for some strange reason, it must have just clicked with me. Everything was just aligned at the right time, and I just absolutely soaked it up. It was kind of, I don't know. I guess up until that time, I'd only really had sort of sci-fi experiences with films like Forbidden Planet and things like that. A lot of the older sort of sci-fi stuff like that. And I think The Black Hole tended to sort of hark from that sort of creative arena, but it obviously brought much more substantial special effects to the fore, and had a kind of an edge that was just realistic enough for the 8-year-old me to be absolutely petrified of it.
Fantastic.
So yeah, that was my experience of The Black Hole, and yeah, I've never been the same since. It's true.
Nice one. And what about you, Nige?
Oh, my memories of seeing this for the first time are a little bit kind of weird. I never got a chance to see this at the cinema, and I happened to be at a friend's house who had this on video. And the first time I saw this, I was sat in your mum and dad's living room. That was the first time I'd ever seen it. Sat there watching it on VHS in your house. I'm sure it was.
I think back then, mate, it might have been the old Betamax.
The Betamax.
Yeah.
Of course it was. Yeah, it should have been, yeah. And that was my very first memory of watching it. And I remember seeing the main titles, those vector graphics, being absolutely blown away by, oh my God, what are we watching here? Absolutely enthralled up to the point where they kind of headed through the black hole, and then, right, can we just maybe switch that off and go back to the start again? Absolutely lost. As soon as we went through the black hole, I was like, I had no idea what I'm even watching anymore. And it just lost me. I had no idea what was going off. And I just wanted to restart it and watch those opening titles again and start from there. I remember watching it a few times with you, always enjoyed up to that point. It wasn't until I think many years later that I kind of quite got into the last quarter of the film where they head through the black hole itself. But yeah, it always stuck with me. There's a lot to talk about with this one. A lot of positives I'm sure we'll get into. But yeah, when I remember first watching it, I could watch 3/4 of it, love it, and then I can't compute what's going on. It was too much for me at the time when I was a kid. But I have very, very fond memories of watching this in your living room. Right, first saw it.
Awesome. Well, I've made an impression on you then. I want to ask all of you how do you feel it reconciled with your memories of Disney from around that time?
Oh, back in that time, I can remember the only sort of experiences of Disney films that I had at that time must have been something like I seem to remember renting The Cat from Outer Space, and getting taste of the Love Bug, little bits and things like that, and that obviously be Disney films in the background at seasonal times. But yeah, it was quite completely different to anything that I kind of expected from from Disney, really. That was great.
And what about you, Nige? Did you have much experience with Disney prior to this one?
Not a massive amount, but the more I sort of watch it, to me, it's not a Disney movie. It feels like an early 70s science fiction movie. It's dark, slow, quite serious. It has its moments of action, but in general, it's a very quiet film. It's a film that you have to sit and you watch and you listen real carefully. And it doesn't feel, for me, like a Disney movie at all. And I guess part of me is really glad about that. I love that it's so different. I can now watch it as an adult and still absolutely love it. Whereas I can't necessarily do the same with some of the old Disney, but I can appreciate them, but I can't watch them with a certain love and joy. Whereas this, I absolutely find it fascinating even to this day. But to me, it doesn't feel in any way, shape, or form like a Disney film.
Yeah, I'm gonna throw that to you, Sandy, because you came to this one quite late. So obviously, it was on Disney Plus when you saw it. But would you have pegged it as your typical Disney movie when you first watched it?
Not at all. It doesn't reconcile at all with what I envision Disney to be. And it's not the sci-fi element. It is the darkness, because they did sci-fi. The earliest one I remember being Flight of the Navigator, which I loved. But this has a totally different feel, even with the robots.
Before we get to the actual discussion, we'll take our customary look behind the scenes. And as I've mentioned, this one's been a long time coming. So I've tried to find some little snippets that you guys may or may not know, although I very much doubt the Gavin's not going to know any of this. Having said that, as usual, I'm going to give a spoiler warning to those obsessively familiar with the movie. You may want to skip ahead a couple of minutes to avoid being bored by something you already know. Now, in casting Reinhardt, Gary Nelson was determined to cast Maximilian Schell, and on request of the actor, flew out to Vienna, where Schell was directing for a face-to-face meeting. Upon arriving, however, Schell told Nelson that he would be better off with the actor Jason Robards instead. Stanley Kubrick had just told him of this miniseries he'd seen with Robards, explained Nelson. Schell said, "By the way, have you seen it? It's called Washington Behind Closed Doors." "I thought he was jerking me off," said Nelson. I said, "Yes, I not only saw it, but I directed it." And his face was the most honest shock I've seen on a person. You couldn't direct him any better. And he grabbed me, threw his arms around me, gave me a great big fucking kiss on the mouth and said, "I will do your movie." And that was it. Now, while most of the rest of the casting went without incident for the most part, it was very different for the role of Kate McRae. Nelson initially wanted a pre-Alien Sigourney Weaver, but the head of the casting department countered, "Oh my God, with a name like Sigourney Weaver, we do not want her." Stunning foresight there, ladies and gentlemen. So they ended up turning to Summer of 42 star Jennifer O'Neill, but her signature long hair was a problem. After an initial screen test, the director felt that O'Neill's hair would be a problem and requested that she cut it. After a little deliberation, not to mention a back and forth with Nelson, O'Neill agreed, bringing her own stylist, Vidal Sassoon, to the studio. According to Nelson, they went up to her dressing room and started cutting her hair 1 inch at a time, and having a glass of wine, then cutting another inch and having another glass of wine. And by the time they were finished, the hair was pretty short and she was more than a little worse for wear. I'm paraphrasing here. After the disastrous haircut session, Nelson recalls she got in her car to drive home. Remember, it was the 70s. And she got into an accident on Sunset Boulevard and ended up
Oh,
in
no.
Yeah. So we had to recast, and we cast Yvette Mimieux the next day. So all that trauma and everything, getting a haircut, was for naught. It was kind of a shame. Mimieux, for her part, had to undergo the same treatment, only, maybe without the wine. Originally, Vincent and Bob's eyes were going to be computer screens that could display fully animated expressions. However, they failed to work during the first day of shooting, and the crew had to make a hasty last-minute adjustment by literally gluing back buttons onto the robots' faces. The name of Dr. Reinhardt's ship is the Cygnus, obviously. The first theoretical black hole was discovered in the constellation Cygnus, hence the name. The actual black hole looks nothing like modern artists' conceptualizations of their appearance, such as the one seen in Interstellar. because ironically, the first simulation of the actual look of one surrounded by an accretion disc came out in the same year this movie was released. John Hughes of Tower Films created the green grid sequence that appears in the opening titles. It was the longest computer graphic sequence ever to appear in a film at this point. And because of the tone of the movie and its use of the words hell and damn and its violent scenes, this was, as we've said before, the first PG-rated Disney movie ever. And the film saw a lot of time merchandise, including colouring books, transfer sets, remember those old people? And action figures. Yeah, W.H. Smith visit. It didn't sell well. As a result, vintage toys from the film are now highly sought after and often sell for huge amounts of money. And don't I bloody know it. One bit of proposed merchandise was a record containing the film's soundtrack. The twist was that it would be made of clear, hollowed out vinyl, which would be filled with different coloured oils that would produce a constantly changing pattern as the record spun around on the turntable. Disney was promptly told that such a product would be very prone to leaking, and the idea was scrapped. And liquid-filled records eventually ended up becoming a reality when vinyl became popular again in 2007. Now, sci-fi writer Harlan Ellison was brought in to work as a consultant for this film, but was fired before he made it through his first day. Allegedly, this was due to him spinning a joke about doing, by his own claim, a Disney porn film while having lunch in the cafeteria, going so far as to act out parts of it to his table mates, completely unaware that there were Disney executives seated at the table behind him. According to Anthony Perkins, none of the cast were permitted to see the final 25 pages of the script. The actors were told it was due to the necessity to keep their reactions fresh. However, it turned out to be, well, more than a little white lie. The screenwriters had no idea how to end the film. There was no real ending. Anyone who read the last page saw, in essence, they go through the black hole. That was it. They enter the black hole. End of movie, admitted Nelson. We never had an ending for it. I didn't like the ending. Nobody liked the ending. We just kept shooting, hoping that it would come up with one. We had 125 or 130 days of shooting to think about it. So it wasn't like we actually had to come up with an idea tomorrow. We filmed for quite a long time before we actually did come up with it. I pitched ideas to Peter, and he would draw up visuals of what it might be like to go through the black hole, said Nelson. And I had thought about one of the shots or sequences of passing through the painting on the Sistine Chapel of God reaching out to Adam, with the one with the fingers almost touching, the Michelangelo rendering. The production got permission from the Vatican to film at the iconic location, and the crew travelled to Rome to shoot the famed ceiling fresco and incorporate it into the finale. One of the shots was on a track and was very precise, and it goes into Yvette's eye, explained actor Joseph Bottoms. And they were going to start in the eye of Adam and pull back, and there was going to be this shot of the Sistine Chapel and the creation of Adam. But Disney ultimately got cold feet. We were getting very close to putting the picture to bed, recalled Nelson. Ron Miller and the heads of the studio didn't want anything to be that religious, so it ended up on the cutting room floor. As a result, the entire ending sequence that was thought up on the fly at the last second, and the cast had no idea what it was until they saw the film in theatres. So I'm guessing at least one of you knew most of that already, looking at you, Gavin. But what about the rest of you? Any little tidbits there you were unaware of, or a shock to learn?
I think I'm fairly aware of most of that. I knew one of the potential endings was where they all kind of become ethereal beings. I'd have loved to have seen a different ending in which they appear somewhere very different, and there's a potential of a follow-up film to that. Can they get back through? I'd love to have seen that, but yeah.
Well, there were Whitman produced a comic series which actually went beyond the end of the film, and they ended up in this sort of alternate reality with another Reinhardt and another Cygnus and another Maximilian, and a whole new sort of realm.
Yeah, they entered like a parallel universe, didn't they, with doppelgangers?
Yeah, that was what I remember. I seem to remember getting that when I was on holiday and reading it.
Yeah,
it was all quite wild. Yeah,
it didn't last very long. Apparently, the comic concluded with a cliffhanger that said, "Trapped in another universe with no way to get home, Dan, Charlie, Kate, and Vincent await their fate beyond the black hole. Join us next time in issue number 5. Now, the intention was to develop an ongoing series, but issue 5 never actually came to be in English-speaking countries. There was a number 5 and 6 in Spanish-speaking countries, but from what I can gather, it takes kind of a more lost in space approach, and it features shit like dinosaurs and stuff. And according to many fans, it's really quite childish, so it's not really worth bothering with. But I mean, even so, these comics are going for ridiculous prices on the collector's market.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
So, as with our last episode, the Big Trouble in Little China one, while researching, I unearthed a relatively recent article from 2019 in Hollywood Reporter discussing the production of the movie and its problems. It's talking to director Gary Nelson, as well as cast members Robert Forster, RIP, and Joseph Bottoms. It's a fascinating read, and some of what was discussed just now and made it into today's, behind the scenes. It's on there. So, as with the aforementioned previous episode, I'll make sure the link is in the description for anyone out there who'd like to know more. And so, right, it's time for you mothers to get up, come on and get down with the Cygnus. As always, I'm going to assume we've all watched this again recently, so it's fresh in our minds. So, I'm going to ask you, do you think it holds up? And I'll go to you first, Sandy.
Visual effects wise, it really doesn't hold up, though it was impressive for the time. I think anybody coming into it new, as I did, it's definitely super dated as a film. Although it was for the time quite ahead of its time and groundbreaking. I remember reading that they came up with some new camera systems or kind of reinvented their own camera systems to film this, but I don't really think I could say it held up as far as today's standards.
Yeah, I don't know if I remember watching it a couple of years ago, and it was an HD version, and it looked really nice. But this time, for some reason, the one that was on Disney Plus, the special effects look very dodgy. So I can see your point with regards to that. What about you, Nige?
I disagree a little bit. I think there are certain aspects of it that stand up really well, and I think as a film, bearing in mind it's many years old, I think it's still very watchable for the majority of it. And for me, some of the effects, I watched it only in the last week, and some of the shots and cinematography where you're looking at the sort of main crew area of the Cygnus, and you've got the planets kind of there with the robots or the crew as they are working on them, I think are absolutely wonderful on the eye. Yeah, some of the, I guess, special effects are not great, but for me personally, it doesn't detract from the film at all. I mean, I guess I'm used to watching rubber monsters and stuff like this, so I don't see special effects with any kind of. I'm less critical, I think, of special effects. I'll give them far more leniency than maybe they deserve.
Yeah. What about you, Gav? You think it still holds up? Obviously, it's got a special place in your heart. So.
Oh yeah. I mean, setting that aside and trying to be objective about it. I mean, yeah, it definitely is sort of a product of its time. I think as far as effects are concerned, I think it was pretty brave of Disney to be diving into creating their own camera effects system for it. As far as the effects side of it was concerned, because I believe they were wanting to get Industrial Light and Magic to be able to do the effects for it, but the system wasn't available at the time. I think it was tied up doing Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
From what I remember Harrison Ellenshaw talking about. So yeah, they ended up having to develop this camera effects system now. That I think because of the way it processed some of the compositing and what have you, I think it suffered a little bit in that respect. And I think if they actually went back and gave a proper remaster to the material, going back to the original negatives and recompositing, I think it would probably end up looking slightly different to how it still obviously does in its native form.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
I
would
mean,
be
so,
neat to
so
see.
the effects can be a little bit variable here and there. I think they've got some that are really absolutely spot on, and then occasionally it can just slip when they start trying to get perhaps a little bit too ambitious for what they could do. I think they were really trying to push what they could get out of it, you know. So I mean, you get sort of, I think probably one of the scenes that is kind of most critical across a broader sort of scope would be the ride in the air car when the meteorites assault the Cygnus. I think people could have a little bit of a trouble with that particular effect, what they were trying to pull off there. But then you go to something like the actual meteor scene where they're crossing the bridge, and that looks as flawless now.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and the flybys of the Cygnus when it's lighting up, you know, when the first exploring and whatever. I think those. I mean, to be fair, the model that they actually made was nothing short of stunning. I don't think.
Oh,
I think
definitely.
it's a real shame that they didn't survive.
Yeah.
But I mean, because there was a lot of work went into those, and when you see the back, you know, the sort of background effect shots, you know, the production shots of that's an absolutely beautiful model.
Yeah.
So you can see how they managed to get tight shots and it look competent, you know, in the way that they did. And then, you know, of course, they've got the inventiveness of creating the black hole itself, which, of course, you know, whilst isn't a sort of a spherical hole as we would understand it, and as Christopher Nolan's given us with Interstellar, you know, it's still an insanely beautiful sort of, you know, creation, I think. So
yeah. I mean, we'll stick with the effects. I mean, personally, I love how the Cygnus looks. I mean, it's got an eerie atmosphere. It's covered. I mean, it's completely impractical. Although it supposedly was supposed to be a generational ship, but it's so different from other designs.
It's a unique ship, isn't it? I don't think there aren't many ships that sort of stand out as being relatively unique. I don't think in film history. You know, you've got something like the Death Star. That's obviously, you know, quite iconic in itself, and perhaps Discovery in 2001 is an iconic ship. But the Cygnus, there's nothing else that really sort of quite touches that, I don't think.
No. While doing the research, I came across a quote from someone who basically said, the Cygnus is a sort of glass cathedral spaceship that runs on pure awesome. So, I can't fault that. And I mean, how it looks is amazing. From what I understand, they featured more than 150 matte paintings, which was just an unbelievable amount for films in general. But for a Disney film, it was just kind of unheard of. And with regards to, you know, what you mentioned about the transport tube, I always get the feeling when I'm watching it and they're going through that sequence that had the film done a great deal better than it did, I'm wondering if they were going to use that as a template for like a Disney ride.
I believe they were going to be doing a ride, weren't they?
I
seem to remember. I think here in Britain, in Alton Towers, we had a black hole ride. I don't know if it was directly tied into the film.
I don't think it was. I think it was just kind of riding on the name at that point.
Yeah, it perhaps was. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't anything quite as whirlwind as you'd perhaps imagine either. I don't think it was anything death-defying. But yeah, it wouldn't have surprised me if they were going to expand into something like that. You know, had it been a great deal sort of more successful, I guess.
Yeah, but even now when I'm watching it, I'm thinking, I'd love to go on that ride, even though the damn thing doesn't exist.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, one personal sort of little project that I did do was create a CGI rendering of the central corridor, and I've posted that on my YouTube channel, but that's an aside. But having done that creation, I've been fascinated with the idea of creating a 3D VR Cygnus experience. I thought that would be a pretty cool thing, which
man, you've got to do that.
A lot of fans would like. Well, yeah, I mean, I've yet to sort of fully tinker with VR or anything like that, but I've certainly managed to create the central corridor. All right, that turned out very nice.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
Nice. And going back to what you said, Nigel, it never gets to a point, I don't think, where it takes me out of the film. they are looking dated, but as you mentioned, we've grown up with classic Doctor Who and stuff like that, so your imagination automatically patches over stuff like that for the most part, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah, I didn't find, even though my opinion was that it didn't quite hold up to today, I have much trouble with the special effects. In fact, there were a few things that actually impressed me, like how they were floating about the spaceship in the beginning. I don't know, it looked like more than strings or something. I'm not not even really sure how they did it, but I think that part held up pretty well. And just, a few other exterior shots of the ships. One thing I liked about the ship, it's something that we all complain about sci-fi, how it just seems, it forgets that it's in, a multi-dimensional space. And the Cygnus here, it didn't seem to have a top or a bottom. It almost looked like the bottom almost looked like a mirror image of the top. So I thought that was kind of cool and forward thinking of them.
Yeah. Well, which funny you mentioned about the weightlessness on board the Palomino. The entire thing was supposed to take place in a weightless environment, but the technical difficulties it prompted a rewrite. So obviously, now when it docks up to the Cygnus, they get gravity back, which is helpful.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Otherwise, it would have been a terrible waste of all those bridges and things in the Cygnus design, wouldn't it?
I mean, there is so much wasted space in that ship, but it just looks amazing. I can't fault it. It's just one of the iconic ships to me.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know, as in the sort of lore of the whole thing, how many crew they actually lost in the situation. Because I mean, perhaps the ship itself, it's got that sort of very Gothic sort of haunted house sort of Hammer horror feel to it, but perhaps it was more populated back in the day, when before the mutiny.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been covered in the Alan Dean Foster novelization. And I think that's what you were referring to earlier, Nigel, where they went all ethereal, because in the end of that, they all combine into some kind of Gestalt ethereal entity.
Okay, that was what I was thinking, yeah.
But from what I can gather, Alan Dean Foster, he got the script and filled in a lot of holes from so when people look at certain things in the writing or the plotting of it, and just for an example, I'll give because I think you caught up on this, Sandy, with the McRae's ESP with regards to Vincent.
Yeah, I thought it was cool too that they introduced it early, so it wasn't like so convenient that it got used later. But the lack of radio communication was interesting.
Yeah, well, with regards to the ESP in the novel, it defines it that Kate's got a wireless cybernetic interface, so it's not just she's gifted and can communicate with.
Yeah, I think the whole ESP thing was kind of just a kind of a way of people, a metaphorical way for people to be talking about it, wasn't it, in a sort of casual sense. And of course, as we found out in the story, Vincent was saying that they'd engaged this ESP ability to communicate with robots, and that they were actually literally throwing into black holes as a means to try and find out what was going on.
Yeah,
inside there they had the whole Project Black Hole thing, which and Harry says, oh yeah, it's sort of ancient history, but it's interesting that another little sort of background thing in the lore of the world that that they would have this ESP technology being used in such a way. That was I feel sorry for the robots.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, that brings us into we've naturally progressed on the special effects side of things into the scripting, the plotting kind of things. So I'm gonna throw it over to you, Nigel. You said you got a lot of notes, and what's your take on the writing of this thing? What notes have you got on that?
I've just got that it's a very adult film for me. There's an awful lot about it that is just not a kid's movie. I think from things like Vincent's quotes are all very on the mark. When he's saying them, they're all relevant to that time. They're all famous historical quotes from our history. I think the way Durant's death, when he gets cut apart by Maximilian, I think there is so much about it. There's a mature cast, no kids kind of running around, which just tends to drive me nuts nowadays. I just love that everything about it. I love that the script seems to be written in such a way that it assumes that kids are actually quite smart.
Yeah.
Kids watching this will still get it, and they'll be able to come back to it with a slightly more grown mind and ask different questions and then more different questions. I have so many positive things to say about the script. It's not, don't get me wrong, it's not the greatest script ever written, and there are a few parts that you think, that's a bit dodgy. However, I love the fact that it's got this mature adult feel to it throughout, and it doesn't really vary very much. It's a great script, and it's got so many little quotes that I absolutely love. I think they're absolutely fantastic, but they never kind of dumb it down. It doesn't come out with silly kind of sarcastic comments. It's always done in a way that you go, bloody hell, that's a great line, or that's a really smart thing to say. I love the script. I think it's fantastic.
And it also, I guess, even as a young kid, where you're watching it, where they are quoting, it kind of encourages you to read a little more.
Yeah.
There was something unsaid to the 8-year-old in me that was watching that. There was definitely something sort of a duality with Reinhardt, because he seemed like a really friendly sort of grandfatherly sort of character, a real sort of a wise-ish sort of, this guy's been here and done it, and has got the book and the ticket and whatever, and he knows what he's doing, and he's been on the ragged edge of science. But then, there's just something that becomes very, very uncomfortable.
The part where he speaks to idiot. Yeah, is it Kay McRae where he speaks to and he says, the eyes.
Yeah.
When he's when he's seeing her father. Yeah.
I think there's an ambiguity to it, which you don't normally get along with films like this. It's when you're watching Star Wars, there are certain points where you're hanging around with the heroes where you feel safe. Yeah. And it's the same when you're watching, Star Trek, the motion picture. You never quite get that feeling of security throughout this, even with the heroes, because you always think that there's another shoe to drop.
Yeah, I can remember thinking about the characters who I was actually sort of latching onto. I mean, when you watch a film, you sort of build up an empathy with any of the characters that you're kind of watching, and for me, I was latching onto Pizer as a kind of a friendly sort of youthful character within the cast, and he was kind of the lad that I was identifying with, and then Vincent for his sort of friendliness and willingness to sort of play a little bit sort of more light-hearted. You could almost feel like he was a kind of trying to just ease the crew a little bit, and then his interaction with Bob, and how everything just sort of started falling apart once we started learning what was going on, and that was when the kind of horror behind it all sort of started sinking in to me as an 8-year-old watching this, and then it became very much a sort of a cut and clean sort of black and white sort of horror show.
Yeah,
the sort of Cygnus turns out to be a kind of floating tomb, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, that's it. The funeral scene was absolutely remarkable for that, because the 8-year-old me is looking at it and thinking, oh, these are robots, and then all of a sudden he's having to contend with the idea that there's something else going on. And like I say, now you twig it, but the 8-year-old me was really finding it as a sort of an exploration, and a discovery of what was going on. And I was kind of, having to wait on Bob's explanation of what was going on, because I don't know, perhaps a part of me didn't even think that Disney was going to go that dark.
No,
it's something like that.
I think this was pretty much my first horror movie. because I think a lot of the things in it are more of the horror genre than they are of the sci-fi, and especially sci-fi adventure. So you can go from this, having a good time at the shootout with Vincent, Bob, and Star, and then the tone shift sometimes.
Yeah,
it's just like when Harry goes in and sees the hydroponics and he's trying to talk to the what he thinks at that point is an android. There's something very haunting. It's very off kilter.
Yeah, where he was just sort of sat looking at this thing and talking and kind of reflecting on the idea that it seemed a little bit too human, and you could almost think like he was looking, this humanoid was looking out from the inside of that mask, and God only knows what it was thinking, if it was thinking anything. You know what I mean? It's little things like that you just sort of reflect on once you've become familiar with it, once you've had the experience. It's deep stuff, for a Disney movie.
I think what helps it as well is the era that it came from, because when you look at the 70s, the sci-fi during the 70s was very hard hitting. You've got things like Soylent Green and Planet of the Apes and Westworld and stuff like that. So it has similar kind of elements to that. The things that you have to think about. It deals with mortality and it deals what it is like to be human. And then it mixes it, and to me, it does a really good job of mixing it with that space adventure that you saw in Star Wars.
Yeah, another film from that era that you did, like you say, from the 70s. Another film of that era that kind of put me in a similar sort of place was Silent Running. I remember watching that when I was a kid, and indeed the ships in that were almost Cygnus-like. It was quite interesting.
That cut me up at the end for different reasons.
Again, though, for Disney to actually, do something that would even align with something like Silent Running, is an interesting thing in itself, and I think a lot of people gave The Black Hole a rough ride for its pacing, but to be perfectly honest, given that its strength is really kind of coming from that Gothic horror sort of angle, I think the quiet sort of moments that you got in the film as it progresses, I think that actually paces the narrative really nicely.
I love the fact that it's such a quiet film for large periods of time.
Yeah,
you're just watching people discover things, learning with the characters. It's clearly come out of a different period, but I think its strength is there. The fact that it takes itself quite seriously.
Yeah, I get the feeling that was inspired a lot by sort of the Hammer horror sort of films. That sort of background of where you would have the story. So there was somebody that actually did a comparison. I forget where it was. It was on a website. Someone had done a comparison between the Black Hole and the House of Usher.
Oh wow!
And they'd actually sort of drawn parallels with that, and that being the sort of notion in my mind that the essence of the Black Hole came imaginatively, narratively, from something like the background of Forbidden Planet and those kind of things. Feels like it could have really rolled through the sort of Hammer horror sort of approach, where you have your dark sort of castle in the original sort of Dracula, where you get the castle and you get them rolling up to that and sort of settling in, and it's all been a little bit disquieting. That's how the Black Hole fed to me when I was a kid. I watched a fair number of these, I think, on TV up to that point, and had sort of some introduction with the old Christopher Lee sort of Draculas and the old sort of Hammer horrors. So then to come to something like this that was taking a similar sort of dark, disquieting sort of edge and wrapping it up in a sci-fi wrapper, delivering it in a sort of a sci-fi serving, it was just a really, really potent combination for me, I think, and I think that's why it still sort of carries that essence with it.
Yeah.
You know,
What about you, Sandy? What you've been remarkably quiet these last few.
Oh, not by choice. I actually did think the writing was pretty good. There wasn't a lot of exposition at all, really. They just jumped right into giving, some short demands and just talking about some things that they were coming across. But yeah, not a lot of exposition. And I was just said that the film takes itself very seriously, and I agree with that. Also, there was no cheesy dialogue at all, no cheesy moments. I found nothing like that in the writing. And regarding the pacing, I actually thought the pacing was pretty good too. Each scene served a purpose. We found out something new, or as the crew was split up, we were checking in with all the different characters. So I thought the pacing was pretty good.
I do like the fact that they raise the possibility. I think it's over the dinner scene that it could be a wormhole rather than a black hole. They're discussing the Einstein-Rosen bridge.
Oh yeah,
and I do like that they kind of cover that. I mean, you then getting into a thing is, surely Reinhardt would know what is a black hole and what is potentially a wormhole. But I do like that they do try and explain some of the. I mean, yes, the science isn't fantastic, and I know recently that Neil deGrasse Tyson ripped the scientific inaccuracy of this. But I think with like a lot of these things, if the story's good enough to cover it, you can kind of accept it with headcanon as to what's happening. It's like the where they're escaping and later on they're on the outside, what appears to be the outside of the ship, and people instantly go for, especially the later audiences that didn't have this connection as watching it as a child, they instantly go for the plot holes, and I think it does it a bit of a disservice to some extent.
Yeah, I think the thing with the black holes is you've kind of got different films, haven't you? You've got films that you would sort of describe as science fiction, and maybe hard science fiction. So you've got your sort of 2001s that will approach it like that. But I think the black hole falls into science fantasy more than science fiction, and I would, which I find ironic because I think I'd put that in the same category as Star Wars, which I would argue is science fantasy rather than science fiction.
Yeah,
necessarily. I mean, the like you say, sort of theoretical plot holes notwithstanding, I think the black hole definitely goes more for the creative artistic side. And I mean, I know that recently in your podcast that you did talking about Flash Gordon, and there was a lot of conversation in that about how you might sort of have explainer science fiction, sort of science fact and lore that can kind of cover the bases where there are plot holes and things like that. I've always felt for the Cygnus that if you were going to have something like an Eiffel Tower in space, you would realistically want that to have some kind of a protective atmosphere around it.
Yeah.
Because while space is empty, something like that could get easily punctured, as we saw.
Yeah, that's what my headcanon does.
Yeah.
So when they are climbing, I mean, apparently they were going to be using spacesuits.
Yes.
The cast just completely disliked their design, and there wasn't enough time to redesign them, so they just thought, "Sod it, we'll shoot it without." But yeah,
I'd love to know what was so bad about them. I've never seen anything. Never seen them, so
yeah. So I can kind of. I mean, I don't know how somebody that comes to the film later, like you, Sandy, but I've always said that if you're having to resort to headcanon, there's a failure somewhere along the line. Yeah. So while I will admit that there is a flaw in the scripting with regards to that, when it comes to my headcanon, obviously there's that stable field that's keeping the Cygnus from going into the black hole, as you said, Gav. I just see it as this kind of protective atmosphere. So that's how I explain it away.
That was actually my thought as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so
the anti-gravity field.
Yeah, the thing is, at the end of the day, the whole thing, it's a bit of a problem like that. But I think you've got the essence of what you've got going on at this particular point is very much nailing down into the disaster side of the movie. Of the whole original concept. I think so. It's basically a kind of a panic rush to the death, isn't it? Just to try and get away from all of this, and I think that's kind of like where you have to put your head when it gets to that. They've got the desperate run against Maximilian and Vincent's battle there, and it's all kind of coming to a head where they're basically just trying to get away and off the damn thing.
I mean, another one of the things that cropped up during this watching is when they're talking about the faceless androids, and they say, "Oh, you can't program emotion." But ironically enough, the robots on the Cygnus are the most emotional characters. There, you've got Star being smug and then blowing a fuse in frustration, and Maximilian's got this kind of superiority about him.
He's got a big ego, Anti-Max.
Yeah.
He's a real problem. I think he became a problem for Reinhardt.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a few scenes there where he's, actively deciding whether or not to follow his orders.
Yeah.
And then in the end, you're thinking, did he abandon him to his death on purpose?
Yeah. That Max was a real quandary for me as a kid. I wasn't happy about him at all.
No. So, but I mean, yeah, I do think it does have that plot holes, but I think people that come to the movie later might actively go searching for these plot holes. I don't know if you've experienced anybody that's watched it at a later date. I mean, weirdly enough, Sandy seems to be the one that hasn't pulled it to bit.
I offer that perspective, yes.
But I remember you saying at the time, I could go one or two ways with this, either the, normal or mystery science theatre. So what would I mean, when you watched it, were you cognizant of what you would term any glaring plot holes that were enough to put you off the project?
No, not really. I think my first time watching it was when it seemed more campy, and I wasn't as quite into it. I thought there was a plot hole of if she could communicate with Vincent, why couldn't she sense or communicate all of the other people on the ship? But that was explained. Something you said earlier, there was some kind of interface, but that I if there was ever mentioned, I missed it.
I don't think it was mentioned in the film. And again, I think it was Alan Dean Foster who were like trying to patch what he would term holes in the script. But I just, it's a strange one because I'm coming at it from the perspective of someone that saw it when they were 5 years old. So when someone says, "Oh, I'm going to communicate with a robot via ESP," I just take that on board and run with it. Yeah. So I was just wondering what perspective, you had coming to it later, and with that not being in the actual script, if when you first saw it, you just thought, "Oh, that's a bit ludicrous."
Nothing really. I had some problems with some of the editing, so I wouldn't really call that a plot hole. I don't know if you want to discuss that now.
Yeah, we'll go on to the direction/editing. So yeah, go for it, Sandy.
The part that was glaring to me is, towards the end where they're fighting their way back off the ship, and they go down that tunnel, yet they're fighting in environments that were clearly on the other side of the tunnel, like the plant, the agricultural area, that they were exploring when they were all on one side of the ship, came up after they traveled back through the tunnel on the other side of the ship where they were fighting. So just some scenes like that I felt were out of place, shot differently maybe, and sewn back together, where that was a little bit bothersome to me.
That's fair enough. What did you think on the direction as a whole?
The direction as a whole, I thought, was pretty good. Like you mentioned, I mean, it's not easy to bring character out of something that's nonverbal. And so I thought that they did that pretty well. And like you mentioned, they were the most charismatic things. Everybody else seemed kind of stoic, but you would expect that, especially from Robert Forster. You would expect that from, scientists or people in space travel. Unlike nowadays, sometimes we see a crew and they just seem so dang silly. It's like you wonder how they even made it through any sort of space program or got into space, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is tame by today's standards and even by late 1970s standards. But when Alex unmasks, what he thinks the robot and reveals that groaning zombie-like face, it had no precedent in a Disney live action. And to me, it's quite disturbing.
Yeah, that was the Black Hole's version of the chestburster, wasn't it, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's when it turned into horror right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it does have that element of that kind of body horror, off-screen thing seen in the 70s. Like I've mentioned, the aforementioned Soylent Green. But, while it was a common practice in hard sci-fi movies at the time, you'd never expect it to rear its head in a Disney movie.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that whole sequence just there, right there, was the kind of showing the adult side of it, wasn't it? I mean, Durant's demise as well at the hands of Maximilian. I mean, I think even in the novelization and certainly in the character in the comic books, it was just simply a case of Reinhardt shooting him. I think Reinhardt shot him in the comic, and I think Maximilian might have shot him with a laser in the novelization. I mean, even Alan Dean Foster didn't go so far as to have him eviscerated.
No, I honestly hated that scene, and I had a conversation with the guy that runs these podcasts, Mike Sandy's, good friends with him, and he was asking about that scene the other day, and I would just say I think it's just a kind of masterstroke in editing.
Well, yeah.
I mean, some of the editing could be off, but with that, I think it's done really well. Yeah, you don't see any blood, but you're not going to in a Disney film. No. But they do that old Texas Chainsaw Massacre thing, whereas they cut away and then your imagination kicks in. And that just makes it so much more terrifying to me, and especially, as a child.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was a remarkable moment for a Disney movie. It definitely earned its A certificate with that one, I think, didn't it?
Yeah.
Really,
what about you, Nige?
Impression.
I think that particular bit, is absolutely horrific, but most importantly, it's memorable.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That's one of the key points. People go, "Oh my days, did I just see that?" And you can't believe what you've just seen, but you don't forget it, and that's really, really important. Yeah. I think even the way Lado acts it out, acts Duran's death. It's great, and you're thinking, "Oh my days!" And like you say, you can't see the blood, but you're just imagining what is going off.
Yeah, it cemented the horror of Maximilian as well, really, didn't it? Because I mean, all the time throughout the film, you'd had this horrible sort of sense that Max was just a bit too big, a little bit too. There was just something, that wasn't quite right.
No confusion after that bit, was there?
Oh, well, yeah, and then you get that, and it's like, right, Max has put his hands up, quite literally, It's like there's no mistaking this robot is not good.
There were times even towards the middle where Reinhardt looked like he was scared of himself.
Yeah.
Well, I remember that as a kid, just wondering when he was whispering to McRae, "Protect me from Maximilian." I wondered at the time. My mind was trying to decide whether he was saying that just to try and get her on side, or whether he was really saying that because he's just never seen Max do anything like that. And obviously, I would imagine Max hasn't had much of an opportunity to do something like that, pending the notion that Max was around for the mutiny in the original overtake of the sickness. I don't know. I don't know if there was anything in the lore about whether Max had been made afterwards or not, or whether he was there as part of Reinhardt's defense against the mutiny. But I get the feeling he'd never seen Max do anything like that.
Those things like those lines, don't you think it's great? Because whenever I watch that and I hear him utter that line, I don't know whether he's saying it because he's actually generally fearful or if he's just trying to fool those guys. Because later on in the film, you think, no. He knows exactly what he's doing. But it is a little bit ambiguous. You're never quite sure. And there's a number of things in the film where it's not black and white. You've got to just think about it and go, actually, it could go this way, it could go that way. And you're never quite sure. And I like the fact that it keeps you on your toes like that. It's not so obvious. It makes you think.
Yeah.
There were definitely several philosophical lines of thought in the movie that I did like. I meant to bring that up during the writing and forgot. That several philosophical lines of dialogue that were really good. But regarding what we were talking about, the first time when he does say, protect me from Maximilian, but then in the very literally next flashback to him, he's acting normal again. He doesn't seem scared at all. So that's what makes me maybe lean a little bit towards what you thought about just trying to get her on his side. That was interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that. And then when you see him truly horrified is after he actually kills Alex, I think it was. And that's when he really seemed to realize that he was no longer in control.
Yeah. From that point, there's not really much interaction in the film between him and Max after that sort of point, is there? It's all very, very sort of functional, and they don't really go too much into that. But then when he abandons Reinhardt at the end, and that's it, that's the next sort of flag with Max, isn't it? You wonder whether or not he was literally just turning his back on him and just saying, "Have at." Or whether it literally was just too late for Max to be stopping, and that's very sort of debatable and borderline as to whether he just left Reinhardt to it.
I think Nelson did a really good job with creating that atmosphere of ambiguity. So as Nigel said, you're always questioning what's kind of going on. You kind of with the crew themselves. It's almost like you're one of these people that's trapped on this ship. Because I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I wanted him to get off. I just wanted him to get off the Cygnus.
I'm going to say that Booth really managed to sort of amp up that sense of panic, didn't he? in you as a kid, I think, he was very good at sort of representing the part of you that wanted to be out of it.
Yeah. I think Nelson did a really good job with the direction on this, and I don't think he's credited enough. I mean, when you look at that at the start of that flyby of the Cygnus, together with that music, it sets the tone perfectly from there. You've got this haunted, somber atmosphere, and from then on, it's hard to shake it. It's removed. I mean, let's be honest. It was 1979. It's not the only movie out that year to feature a flyby of a ship. So the fact that it holds its own and it just puts you on edge, that scene. And regardless of how many times you've seen it, even when I watched it just a couple of days ago, when they're shining that spotlight and just passing over, together with that score, it's a thing of beauty.
Yeah. Oh, I mean that kind of pulled a lot of quality out of the film, having John Barry doing the score. I think he did a remarkable job with that. That was just the movie seemed to be really pitched well towards his style as much as it was him bringing what he brought to it. You know what I mean? I think there was a real sort of it got the movie score before it with Moonraker, and then after the Black Hole with Raise the Titanic, and it's got that sort of that feel that just captures the essence, the atmosphere of the film beautifully.
I love Barry, and I love Barry's work on the Bond movies.
Yeah,
it may be overused once or twice, but to me, Black Hole stands out as one of Barry's best to me. I just think it's just utterly fantastic.
Yeah, well, a lot of people were really clamoring for that soundtrack for the film, because I mean, when it originally came out, Disney released the the album, which had 5, 6, 7, 8, about 9 tracks on it, something like that. And it was very much sort of a truncated. It was a nice, respectable release, but it was fairly truncated compared to what there was. And then Entrada went through a 3-year process. There was a guy, I forget the guy's name now. Sorry, whoever it was that did it. But he spent 3 years trying to track down the original masters to be able to produce a full version of the score. And Intrada did actually release it in 2012, I want to say.
One more sort of like attention to detail that every time I watch it, I always notice it, and I don't know why, but it just makes me smile. Is the couple of things for Vincent's expression in his eyes, how that changes throughout the film, where the actual iris is in terms of the white of the eye changes, the actual shape changes. And there's a wonderful bit near the beginning where they're weightless and the Palomino is tumbling and Vincent simply stays in the center of the screen.
Yeah,
it's almost like he's kind of being used as a kind of a mechanism to help keep oriented.
It's a wonderful shot, and it's just a lovely little attention to detail that for me always stands out every time I see it. I think, you know what, that's bloody brilliant.
If I was Holland, that would really help me in terms of keeping orientation with which way the ship should actually technically perhaps be facing. It'd be interesting to know.
And it's just a lovely shot, of everything spinning around, and him as an audience, you're kind of just watching him and you're feeling a bit sorry for the crew as they kind of just floating all over the place, and he's just there waiting for them to sort things out. I just love that bit.
Yeah, that was an interesting touch there.
I mean, while we're on about, little touches, it would be remiss if we didn't talk about the ending. So what's your general impression of how this thing ended? I'm gonna go to you first, Sandy.
I thought it was really interesting. A line that a couple of lines that were almost, throwaway in the beginning, where Reinhardt, I think it was Reinhardt talking about, going into a black hole would be like going into the mind of God.
Yeah.
And then another time later, Reinhardt's staring out at the black hole, and he talks about the first cause, what something caused this and what caused that cause, was such a cosmological argument by Aquinas. And so I knew we were already going in a spiritual direction, and I thought that the conceptualization of going into a black hole was pretty decent. It was obviously chaotic. It was very internalized, which was an interesting concept. And then you saw them, of course, being stretched and pulled by gravity, perhaps. I don't even know if that was on purpose, but that lines up with something very close to what Interstellar did. So that was very interesting. And then just it became obvious that Reinhardt and inside Maximilian, or became Maximilian, ended up in a hellscape, while the rest of the crew was sort of carried out the other side of the black hole. So I just really thought that was very interesting, and really the best part of the whole movie, because you're waiting the entire time. I mean, I remember y'all were talking about you're waiting for everybody. You wanted everybody to get off the ship. I was waiting to go into the black hole. I was excited for that.
You just reminded me, Sandy, talking about that. I have to bring this up, or Mike would never let me hear the end of it. Maximilian was named, obviously, prior to them hiring Maximilian Schell. So it's kind of ironic that at the end, Reinhardt climbs basically into Maximilian's shell.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for you, Mike, because heaven knows he's probably fed up for editing all these people that actually like this movie. Yeah. What about you guys, Gavin, Nigel? What did you think to the ending?
Go on, Gavin. After you.
Oh, blimey, man. All right. Yeah, as a kid, I can remember it being very bizarre. One thing I always actually do remember, even as I was watching and processing it, I can remember there were few people in the cinema, but there was a kid in there who piped up, "Mom, why's that man gone into that robot?" And I will always remember him saying that. I always remember that as a thing at that time. But even, watching it as a kid, I didn't really know what to make of it, I guess. The part of me could take what was happening literally. Another part of me kind of saw, because we had that, once we actually hit the actual eye of the storm, and it kind of looked back at what it looked like it was looking back at McCrae when looking into her eye.
Yeah.
A part of me wondered whether or not there was some kind of crossover with what Dean Foster had been saying when he was taking the whole sort of Gestalt entity sort of approach. When we saw it was going into McCrae's eye like that and kind of reflecting back on it. Part of me was wondering whether or not she was actually just kind of, this was her perception of what she was seeing. And that kind of fed back for me for what had happened throughout the sort of entirety of the film from her perspective, because her connection with the sickness had been a father, and the fact that Reinhardt had effectively killed her father. That's from what Bob was saying. I was kind of getting the feeling that this was perhaps resolving some kind of inner conflict in herself, perhaps, the journey through the black hole, if it had been a metaphysical experience rather than a literal one, that she was actually sort of witnessing Reinhardt's kind of damnation, in with respect to how she might have actually felt about the situation. In a sense, because they went the metaphysical way, and a lot of people kind of criticised them for trying to riff off 2001 and doing it badly. What I would actually say is perhaps what they actually did was something fairly smart, in that they left it in such a state that you could actually reinforce your own interpretation on it, and the fact that potentially you could take something that is how it is in a sort of an open-ended state and recount that back upon the narrative that you've seen through the entire film. It's a fascinating thing that you're actually able to sort of peel layers off like that. So The ending, I don't know. It could be literal. It could just be a metaphysical experience on the part of McCrae, which also, if that was the case, would beg the question: what did Charlie, Dan, and Vincent see?
Yeah. I mean, I think no matter how rushed it may have been, or whether you personally like it or not, regardless, it sticks with you.
Yeah,
and it still unnerves me to no end. So, what about you, Nigel? I remember you having a problem with the ending for a while.
I'm going to piss everyone off a bit, I think, and just say I really don't like the ending of this film. I think I watch this film relatively often, maybe 2-3 times a year. I probably see this film. I maybe only watch the ending once out of those 3 times. I'd kind of go, I'm watching a haunted house film, and then suddenly it becomes, whoa, what the fuck's going off? It's like,
did you say you saw this as a kid?
I did, yes.
Yeah, you did. But what did you make of the ending?
I didn't. I just didn't compute it at all.
Right.
And I've returned to it many times, and I've watched the ending, and I love the soundtrack. I think it's quite pretty in parts. Every now and again, I kind of like to ponder, what if this, what if that? Yeah. But I don't find it a particularly enjoyable ending at all. I literally almost feel like I've gone from film 1, and then it's suddenly become something, whoa, it's way different. Where have we gone here?
Yeah, fair play.
And I'm kind of, for me, with the first 3/4 of the film, I'm expecting them to fly through this black hole into somewhere strange, mysterious, a lot of questions. It does that to 11. I'm going, whoa, unless I'm feeling really in the zone, I go, do you know what? I can't think about this tonight. I've got work tomorrow. I've got this to do.
Weirdly enough, Nigel, my dad takes the exact same attitude. He'll sit through it, but at the end of it, when it's turned off, he'll just turn around and say, "That is a very poor ending."
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? This is how the critics bit it as well, isn't it? You know,
yeah. I mean, he got absolutely drubbed by the critics. Really had a kicking for it.
Yeah,
but you know, a lot of movies.
Every few times of going to it, I will sit and I'll watch it and just go, right, what's it asking me? What can I think about this? But in general, when I watch The Black Hole, I get to that end and I go, no, that's the wrong ending for this film.
Yeah.
For me personally, I'd prefer something a little bit different.
Does anybody have any notes? I mean, again, speaking to Mike on this, he hated it. He thought people were starring in this because they thought the producer had kidnapped the dog or something, was holding it hostage. But I think they're really good in this. I think they all hold their own. I think Yvette Mimieux maybe could have been given a bit more decent material, but other than that, I think they're really good. It's understated. For me, it was my first exposure to a lot of these, performers: Anthony Perkins, Ernest Borgnine, and even from Shell, who's he does have a tendency at times to chew the scenery, but for a lot of the time, he has that underlying kind of threat vibe going on. Yeah. I think they're all really good performances in this. Yeah. I mean, one could say it's taking things a bit too far with Slim Pickens as Bob. I do like the little throwaway line that he was programmed in Houston, but
I think Bob's a perfect. That's another thing that's kind of a bit of an odyssey, isn't it? Why McDowell and Pickens never got the due credit on the film.
Yeah. So, what do you guys think to the acting?
I think the acting generally is great. I think it's for me. I love seeing a mature cast, seeing slightly older individuals being the heroes and villains, and it not being a load of kids running around saving the universe.
Yeah,
it's got no experience. They've not got world-weary faces. I like the fact that there's certain interactions where Paisley wants to rush outside to save Vincent, who's trying to fix a panel, and he's in trouble. And it's almost like you expect the Star Wars moment where he goes outside and the captain turns around and says, "Stay your post." And he says, "Hey, he's one of us." And he's like, "Absolutely, he is."
Yeah.
And it's just a very kind of, actually, it kind of grounds it in a bit of realism, the age and the thing of the actors. But I think everyone puts on a really good job. I have no qualms with any of the acting at all for this.
Yeah, it was an interesting cast, wasn't it? I mean, you got I think a lot of people were surprised they ended up with Norman Bates in a Disney film at the time. I think that kind of surprised people a bit. But yeah, I mean, we've got Ernest Borgnine who came very much from the sort of disaster movies, didn't he? As much as The Black Hole was a disaster production, he came from the Poseidon Adventure, didn't he? So I mean, it was good to see him going into the part. I mean, irrespective of how we feel about the characters and how they may have been portrayed, I think it is a very good cast. I was just
about to say, this is one of the films at a young age that solidified my love for Roddy McDowall. I just think the guy's just amazing.
Yeah, that is a beautiful part of it, isn't it? The voice acting that you get for something like that. I mean, you've had your sort of Anthony Daniels doing the C-3PO, but Vincent was a different kind of character, and Bob was a different kind of character. And when you put Bob and Vincent together, they do actually seem like they pretty much come off the same sort of production line, like they've got the same kind of lineage, don't they?
Yeah. I think he must have loved the script, Roddy McDowall. He must have looked at the saying, "This is brilliant. I'm all over this."
Yeah, you can kind of sense it in his performance. I think that there is a genuine enthusiasm.
Yeah.
I thought the acting was pretty good too, and again, how they brought these characters to life without much exposition. I guess a lot of that is um, because of the dialogue, but I thought they all were well cast in each part they were supposed to play, and that helped a lot with the acting being very believable. Anthony Perkins just being, willing to go where Reinhardt was going, almost. Of course, there was a line he wouldn't cross, but he was willing to put his life on the line just for the sake of knowledge. Knowledge was like the most important thing to him. Yvette, like you said, she didn't have a whole lot of material to work with, but there was one scene I paid particular attention to, was when when Vincent was telling her through the ESP what had actually happened, that all of those robots were actually the crew. And her face, very subtle changes, but she's also trying not to give it away.
That put her in a real predicament, didn't it?
That was pretty good. That was pretty well acted. It was very understated for what it could have been. Like there could have been a gasp and a widening of the eyes that luckily went unnoticed, but there wasn't. There wasn't any of that. I thought it was very, like you said, mature. It was a very mature way to handle it. And then even right after that, and again, this maybe goes back to the writing, but when he's asking her why she's so upset, and she tells him the reason is because Alex has decided to stay on the ship, is very believable too. Whereas in some modern movies, it doesn't come across as believable. Almost the way they deliver the line is almost a little bit over the top. It's like, well, we already knew it wasn't true. Like, why do you have to overdo it? So I thought that was all really good. And then even Joseph Bottoms as Pizer, just the young hotshot, maybe a little bit of a know-it-all, and very good there with the quips all the time. Also thought he was pretty good.
So we're going to go through, favorite character, line, and scene from today's movie. So we'll go straight to the newbie with this one. So Gavin, who's your favorite character in this and why?
That's a very interesting one. The older me likes Holland. The older me will latch on to Holland now, simply for his sort of stoic sort of approach. You know what I mean? That he's kind of got this very focused sort of attention, which for me kind of helps me focus in on the story and that sort of mood. When I was a kid, I latched onto. It was definitely between sort of Charlie and Vincent. I enjoyed their relationship a lot, but I enjoyed Vincent's relationship a lot as well. I felt like he was kind of a nice sort of friendly handhold for kids through this whole thing, where he built up this relationship with Bob. And, he had this sort of, he was this sort of the direct connection to the story in terms of what had happened, the curiosity about it all. So, perhaps when I was younger, it was either Charlie or Vincent for character that I really sort of latched onto. But the older me latches onto Forster's character a bit more, I think.
Nice one. I'm going to go with Vincent still, just because, as I say, I just love Roddy McDowell. So I'm going to go to you, Nigel. Who's your favourite character in this?
I have to completely agree with Gavin. Holland is my favourite character. He's down to earth. He's very matter of fact. He gets stern when he needs to get stern. He has a certain glint in his eye a couple of times, but I just love how he's very measured in anything and everything that he does in this film.
Yeah. When he went up against Reinhardt.
Yeah, call him off. Call him off.
And then he was like, on my ship you ask, and he was like, yeah, okay. Please.
Call him off.
That was a beautiful moment like that. That really captured captured Holland's essence, didn't it?
Yeah, I think he's terrific in it. That's my go-to character.
Nice. And you, Sandy? Anyone standing out for you this week?
Yeah, I really loved Pizer. I really like. Yeah, hey, do you guys meet the Goon Squad? Just like all of his little one-liners and how he kind of kept things jovial. How he had a lot of heart. And in the beginning, he wanted to go after Vincent, and he did get put in his place. I don't mistake me not wanting to go after Vincent for me having a lack of heart. As he was told, but. He just kind of wore his heart on his sleeve and let it all out. So I really liked him the most.
Cool.
Yeah, that's what made me latch onto Pizer as a kid. I think he was the Luke Skywalker in the film, wasn't he?
Yeah.
That sort of focus for the kids, where you're willing to get in there, all guns blazing, of course. You end up with the horror aspect of it, and you feel like Charlie's still sort of, not really got out of his depth, but he's definitely the younger crew member, isn't he? Undeniably. So,
yeah. Right, we'll stick with you, Sandy. What's your favourite scene?
My favorite scene. I really was going to talk about that. Looking down and seeing just how tall that tower was, and realizing the vastness of the whole project Black Hole, the whole thing, how big it was. I just really thought that was really cool, that shot. Cool.
I'm gonna have to go with that funeral scene and the one where he's exploring the crew quarters. I just think it's unbelievably haunting and sets it up. I just think it's so atmospheric. So even now, having seen it numerous times, I've got to go with that. I love that little scene. So what about you, Gav?
Yeah, well, the kid in me loves the meteor scene, and we'll never get over that. How damn good that looked in the cinema. That blew me sideways. And the wonderful sort of cut and thrust and parry of the battle that they have with the robots in the garden. Those are the things that stick with me as a kid. As an adult, yes, there's the funeral scene, and there's the moment with Harry in the garden.
That's another beautiful one.
When he's facing the, and that's a retrospective favorite as well. Because once you know what it is, what's going on, the fact that he was so close to this poor lobotomized sod, whoever he was or whoever she was behind the mask. And one other sequence that I will point to as well, with again two actors who unfortunately had no credit in it whatsoever. Towards the end, when Reinhardt's calling for help, and the camera's looking at two crew members who are just sat there, when I watch it, I see them turn to him as if they're kind of ignoring his cries for help, as in sort of a big screw you, this is what you did to us. But then a part of me also looks at it and wonders whether the two of them are just kind of looking at each other as if to say, like, let's end it here, and just. Which kind of, has that sort of gothic horror overtone again to me, So I'll give an award to two people who were never even credited for just a nice silent performance there.
Nice.
That kind of drove to me as a kid. It kind of drove home finally sort of the horror of what had happened to the crew. So that kind of somber scenes are the ones that stick with me as an adult now. Yeah.
Cool. And what about you, Nige?
I think there's a lot of scenes that you can sort of name in this film that really stand out. My personal favourite is where Harry is kind of exploring, and he kind of talks to Robbie, gets nothing back, and then as he glances around, he sees it limping out of the room.
Yeah.
From that moment on, that when I saw that was the whoa, what is going off here? So that for me is my sort of favourite scene that I always kind of recall when I think about this film.
Cool. And seeing as you brought it up, what's your favourite line?
For me, I think it's one of several Vincent quotes, but I think it's
A wolf remains a wolf, even if it has not eaten your sheep.
Bastard! I was going to use that.
just brilliant.
Yeah, I'm in place of that one. I'm going to use.
Vincent, were you programmed to bug me?
No, sir, to educate you.
So, what about you, Gav? Favorite line?
Favorite lines? Well, I love.
The authorities would still consider that an act of piracy, Doctor. What would you have said, Mr. Booth, if the authorities would have called back Columbus just before he discovered the New World? You wouldn't even exist.
And he was going into justifying the ends of the means of his mission. You know what I mean? Just pointing to the fact that, you know, the idea of cutting the mission short was ultimately going to be the worst sort of travesty of, you know, which kind of gives you the whole thing of Reinhardt's angle of you know, his whole motivation for what he's doing, you know, which was obviously the thing that tipped him over the edge and then ended up lobotomizing all the crew to do it and make damn sure that mission did actually continue.
Yeah,
and Alex was totally for the ride the whole time until he found out that it was the crew, but it didn't matter to him that he disobeyed orders, you know, that he was still there. None of that mattered to him. So the knowledge versus, you know, how far are you willing to go for it? Yeah, that's a big thing.
Yeah, that was a big snap for Alex when he came out of that, when he actually did discover that, because I think he was still thinking that there was going to be a robot underneath there, wasn't he, when he took the mask off, I think.
What about you, Sandy? What's your favourite line?
My favorite comes from Kate, actually, right after Reinhardt asks for Kate's help and protection, looks scared. After that, she says, if there's any justice at all, the black hole will be your grave. And I just think that was so brave. And you know that it stung.
Yeah.
And it's what he deserved.
Brilliantly underlined, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, we'll give our final scores in a moment, but if you've been with us for a while, you'll know that before then, we'll come to you out there as you let us know in our audience participation section. And we had some interesting and varied responses on this one, maybe a little bit more divisive than our recent shows. And like last time, I'm again going over to Sandy for this section this week. I didn't think we were going to get a lot this time, but we were inundated in the end. Isn't that right, Sandy?
Yeah, I was actually shocked too at all, especially me coming so late to the movie, shocked at all the people who had seen it. I really thought it was more obscure than that.
Go for it, Sandy. Just, let us know what everyone thinks.
All right. So coming from across all various social medias, I assume, from Silver Screen Pod.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much just Facebook on this one. We have that many.
Mark says, the black hole is an absolute masterpiece for children of the late 70s. Alien was a bit too R, although he did admit to watching that at a young age. But he brought his kids to the theater for the 40th anniversary showing. And he said that the black hole was more reality than Star Wars. Looking back, Star Wars is action with some sad parts. The Black Hole is a sad movie with some action, but more depth. And that's from Mark. Mark cool. With a C. Sean Northridge mentions he had the pop-up book. So, man, I bet he wishes he had held on to that. I bet that would be worth a pretty penny nowadays.
Oh, I used to have that as well.
Oh, man. Tim Knight said, I loved the film as a kid. Have watched it again a couple of times recently. It hasn't dated too much, so he agrees with you guys on that. Fashion is neutral. Some effects are good. Others are poorly executed. The acting and actors hold up well. The storyline is good but predictable. I think the introduction of ESP lets it down. The fact you can telepathically talk to a living robot, I feel, is a flaw in the believability of the science. The soundtrack is awesome. He said he had the LP and he would listen to it over and over. Sam says, I loved the movie as a kid and have watched it numerous times as an adult. I still wish there was a better ending. Left it wide open and there was never the sequel. Did they end up getting home in a parallel universe, heaven? Also, like others have said, a precursor to this movie, for example, when Sickness was launched and how it got to this point would have been awesome. And that's from Sam Amy Vastano. Mark, another Mark with a C, Shuli, I think it is. It is great how some of the lines are famous quotes, like "A pine can't hold a quart. If it holds a pint, it is doing all it can. It's doing all it can." From Margaret Dalen, and "Impossible is a word to be found only in the dictionary of fools." From Napoleon. These upstarts think I'm some old freak. From Bob. Yeah, this movie was very quotable. Lots of adages and quotable lines, really.
Yeah.
Nick Pepper says, in 1979, I was a 7-year-old in Botswana, a TV-free and cinematic desert, I imagine. There was a cinnamon and Gaborone, I think it's pronounced, which largely showed old releases and frequently managed to put the reels on in the wrong order. Nevertheless, can you imagine seeing the
That's a challenge watching a film, isn't it?
Nevertheless, classic children's party option was to hire a projector and film from a hire shop. Wow. And by 1981, one of my friends secured the black hole for his birthday party.
Wow.
So we watched it on his living room wall, sitting cross-legged on the floor, high on sugar and buzzing off Coca-Cola. That sounds like a very good time.
That sounds like an excellent party. I like that.
I want to do that now.
Yeah, let's do it now.
He says that's the only time he's seen it. My memory is almost completely limited to the name Maximilian, which was a threatening kind of robot. He said it was Googling it, after the fact, he says it was a stellar cast and some surprising uncredited voice actors. He says Anthony Perkins and Ernest Borgnine are not exactly what I describe as obvious choices in an era when Star Wars was still causing ripples and catapulting younger, cooler newcomers into superstardom. Given the amount Disney invested in it, it feels like a misstep. Stephen Heimer says he loves the haunting soundtrack. Leaf Guillen, what I love about the black hole specifically was what it represented for Disney at the time. In the late 70s and early 80s, we had a lot of great sci-fi and sci-fi fantasy movies released. Oh, there it comes again, sci-fi fantasy.
Yeah.
But prior to that, there was a drought of sci-fi, and particularly good sci-fi. Movies like Star Wars and Alien completely changed the landscape. In making The Black Hole, Disney tried to show us that they weren't afraid of the future movies, and they made an entertaining and somewhat dark movie that unapologetically stepped in that direction. Sure, it fell short for most adults, but for kids, it hit some good notes. So much so that those kids now represent adults with fond memories of the film, despite any shortcomings. The characters of the film were brought to life with great acting talent to the degree that those characters still live on in us audience members, long after most of the actors have passed. To me, that's what makes a great film, not how well it does at the box office.
Definitely.
Yeah, nice.
Coming from our missing piece again today, Mike, he says, this is supposedly 2LDR, an unusual movie.
His first review was just one long stream of consciousness. It wasn't a good one.
An unusual movie. It both looks like a Disney movie with wacky sidekicks and sets that would look better as cartoons, and has some huge ideas that don't seem very Disney at all. Credit where it's due, the production values, model shots, and the main ideas are all hard to fault. But there is just so much cheesiness and camp, from the inexplicable psychic woman to the bloody robots that I would probably have loved as a kid, but now just make me groan so hard they can hear me in black hole purgatory. Goodness. The actors mostly looked bored, angry, or confused, with the exception of Borgnine, who seemed thrilled to be there, bless him. Not a terrible movie. The bigger ideas and the ending in particular make an impact, but overall, I feel the best place to watch this would be an episode of MST3K.
Oh, baby cakes.
But I actually think that would be fun. Rachel Sophia says it has the God amongst men named Robert Forster in it. That is all we need to know. Also, the final scene is epic, and she shows just a pic of Maximilian tumbling into space, into the hellscape where he lives out the rest of his days, presumably. Rick Cowling says, never watched it. Always liked the designs, though. And Eric Manktiklo loved it as a kid. Maximilian always terrified me, and I had a soft spot for old Bob. Sean Brady says it's an odd film, some very dark moments in a film with a couple of cute robots designed to appeal to kids floating about. And that ending is wild. Fantastic model work and a great score, but it has a very uneven tone, like it doesn't know who its audience is. Suzanne Keene. I remember, even as a kid, being disappointed that the plastic-faced people were just his crew and not some alien species that he had joined with. Oh, she was a brave kid. I had seen enough Buck Rogers and Star Trek to know that it would be scarier to think that Maximilian Schell's character was being manipulated by aliens than it would be for him to be keeping his crew alive/hostage. It had a lot of potential, and I can see how it had elements of Star Wars, but it drew heavily from Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. Glenn Brooks, a truly stunning film with a mind-bending ending that they could never pull off now. Just goes to show how dark Disney could get given half a chance. And then lovely Adrian, she had a lot of thoughts on the movie, and she also saw this in the theater as a kid when it was released. She said she was scared by the scene when Maximilian killed Alex. We stayed for the rest of the movie, but I remember the adults around me saying it was dark for Disney. I liked it, though, because it was dark. As I was rewatching to prepare for this, I can really see what intrigued me as a kid and why it is a popular sci-fi cult classic. I love the music, John Barry, and the special effects, of course. But the robots are actually still my favorite part of the film. I love Vincent and had somehow forgotten about Bob. The human characters, as I see them now, are really tropey, especially Kate. I mean, her role is simply to worry about her father, care about the male character's well-being, and be rescued. Alas, if this was supposed to be Disney's answer to Star Wars, our Kate is the antithesis of Leia. I like the campy suspense, though, especially the reveal that the crew were turned into smart zombies, and the limping one needs a hug. I distinctly remember thinking that at the end, Maximilian had saved the mean doctor from the dangers of space, but now I realize that scene was a writer's interpretation of eternal damnation. Ah, the innocence of youth. In conclusion, I get why this movie isn't a popular one with normal people. Sorry, normal people. Because it was dark, long, rambling at times, and campy. But for us nerds, I feel like there are aspects of it that deserve appreciation. Go nerds! That was a perfect one to end it on.
It was. Thank you, Sandy. And thank you out there, as always, to everyone for being kind enough to share your thoughts with us. We'd like this to be as much your show as it is ours, so we're always grateful for your interaction. Thank you for that. And on that note, now we know what you guys out there think. It's time to see what our little band of survivors here think. So, as is customary, we'll go around for everyone's final conclusion and score out of 5. So this time, we will... we'll go to Nigel first. Can you give me your thoughts and score out of 5 on this one, mate?
Great film. Ending doesn't quite do it for me. Amazing score. Great cast. One I return to many times. I just genuinely thoroughly enjoy this film. In terms of score, probably getting towards a 4 out of 5.
4 out of 5. Not bad. Not bad. Thanks, buddy. And we'll go to you next, Gavin. Final thoughts and score out of 5.
Final thoughts. Well, it's always going to be one that's going to live with me. It's been here for, 45 years almost now, hasn't it? It's getting there. So, yeah, it just left an absolute indelible mark on me. There's no other way to describe it. It was a remarkable experience. Something that, yeah, really left a mark. I would have to give it. The kid in me would give it 5 out of 5. I will give it 4.5 out of 5, just for inflation.
Nice. And what about you, Sandy? I get the feeling, if anybody, you're going to be the lone voice of reason on this one.
Well, I don't know if that's for sure, but I did like how thought-provoking it was, and honestly, I didn't realize that before Interstellar there was another film that actually went there, as far as entering the black hole and trying to conceptualize what that would be like. For me, that's where the film gets its biggest marks. But overall, I would have to put it a little bit more on the average side, and I gave it 3 out of 5.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Oh, fair comment. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I'll give mine, and then apologies. This is such a weird one. I saw it at a young age, and it's probably coloured my personality ever since. It's another of those that I think is more impressive the more connection you have to it as a child. So I can fully accept that it's not for everyone. Technically, it may not be the best, but cinema has that capacity to grab you and give you an emotional response. And to me, this one is a mood. It's now well over 40 years old, and while it's beginning to show its age, it still has me under its spell. It takes the gung-ho Western space adventure of Star Wars and combines it with the deeper philosophical and metaphysical questions raised by harder sci-fi at the time. And to do it all in a Disney movie is simply mind-blowing. This one stays with you after you've watched it. I may have been highly unnerved in the cinema on my first viewing, but it didn't dampen my enthusiasm for it. Rather, it probably helped shape me. It's a milestone, maybe for the wrong reasons in some circles, but time has proven it to be a classic. And while some parts may be starting to look a little tattered around the edges, even now when I watch it, it takes me back, and I'm a child watching this in the dark, equal parts excited and terrified. And I've given it 4 out of 5. So, working that out between the 4 of us, it comes to a 3.8 out of 5. So I think that's fairly respectable.
It's not bad, that at all.
Especially averaging people who it does have a lot of meaning for, and newer people newly introduced to it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I know I say it every time, but it's been great talking to you all, taking a trip down memory lane on this one. I think everyone out there, unless you Mike, regardless of their personal feelings, can't deny that the fact people are still talking about this 4 decades later shows that despite its flaws, it still holds a special place in many hearts. So all that's left to do now is thank our guests for joining me today. So I'll kick off by thanking my what is turning out to rapidly be my semi-co-host at this point, Sandy. Thanks for jumping into the fray once more.
I was so happy to. Thank you for inviting me again.
Not a problem. I know that, like me, you're pretty much a hermit when it comes to promotion and social media. But just for my own curiosity, have you got any advancement on that thing you've been mulling over recently? Any updates?
No, just that I told my daughter about it, so now she's going to hold me accountable. So I think I need to start looking into that a bit more. I've actually had some thoughts of what it could turn into after that was done.
Oh, nice. Well, when it does see the light of day, I'll be there. I'm looking forward to it. I also want to give a big thank you to Nige for joining us on this one. You were itching to talk about this one since bringing it up way back in episode 1. Did it scratch that itch, mate?
It certainly did. I've loved it. Thank you very much for inviting me again.
Not a problem. Well, again, thanks for joining us. Is there anything you'd like to promote while you're here? Any way you can be reached on social media or anything?
No, not right now. Still work in progress.
Fantastic. You're joining me and Sandy in the Hermits Club.
Absolutely. Bloody lovely.
Together, but separate.
And finally, a big thank you to the newest guest on Cult Classics, Gav. Thanks for joining us today, man. I really, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, guys. It's been real. yeah, it's been really good to be able to have a chat about this. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Would you come back again, or have we terrified you enough by this point?
Oh, no, it's not been terrified at all. As long as I've got some clue of a flashlight as to what I'm talking about.
Well, it's more than us usually. While you're here, are any of your own projects you'd like to promote? Any pages, social media where listeners can find you?
Well, if anybody's interested in any of the creative stuff I do, I have a channel called Kokorogenic Animations on YouTube. That's spelt Kokoro, Genic. I've basically got a page there. I've got you can find me on ArtStation and Behance as well. I've got my graphic art up there. Those are my mainstays for anything that I've done. If anybody's curious to have a look at the black hole animation as well, that's on the Kokorogenic Animations YouTube channel. So you can have a dozy at that and give me some feedback on that.
Nice. Well, I mean, if you pass me the links after this, I'll make sure they go in the description, and then hopefully, we'll have some people come and check out your work.
Oh, that'd be nice. Yes, it's been a pleasure to have a chance to talk about this film. It's only 45 years it's taken me to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, anytime, mate. Well, once more, I consider myself very lucky to have you all here today. And if you out there listening would like to join us for an episode, then please do get in touch, either in the comments section or on our social media. And that goes double if you're one of our listeners from Belgium. We need you to represent. Come on, people. Seriously, though, we always appreciate new viewpoints. So if you want to, get in touch. And as always, if you like today's show, then please hit like, subscribe, spread the word. And please consider leaving us a tip on our Ko-fi account. Again, the link is below. We don't do this because it's easy. We just do it because we thought it would be easy. While we're on the subject of links, I do, again, want to give a very special thanks to Kenny Denton for allowing us to use the Nostromo version of the Black Hole theme. Older folks like myself will remember that it was a very popular thing to back then to have dance versions of popular movie themes. And, back then, dance in that case meant disco. So I was both astonished and pleasantly surprised when I discovered this one. So if you want to read more about Kenny and Nostromo, please check out the links in the description. Now, we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time. Fear not, though, you don't have to miss us too much, as in the meantime, we'll be on our sister show, the Star Trek Hit or Miss podcast, and not only will we be taking a look at some animated episodes over the next 2 weeks, but we'll also be dissecting the fantastic Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. And I believe you're joining us on that one too, Sandy, is that right?
That is correct.
Brilliant. So yeah, why not join us for that one? If you're missing your fix, we'll hopefully see you there. Until then, take care, everyone. And always remember, you can't beat perfection. We're the best.
You have been listening to the Silver Screen Podcast, hosted by DK. Created, produced, and edited by Michael Wilson. Behind the scenes sections and additional material produced by DK. Music by Kenny Denton and Nostromo. Additional sound production by Timeless Journey. Follow the podcast on Instagram at Silver Screen Podcast, or look for the Silver Screen Podcast under Facebook groups. Links to all our social media accounts and more are in this episode's description. This podcast is available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Just look for Silver Screen, Hit or Miss Star Trek. This has been a Mike's Podcast production. Copyright 2022. Thank you for listening.